Okay, so let's dive in. That headline, Ontario bows down to Trump in tariff war. Wow, it really sets the stage, doesn't it?
It certainly does. We're jumping right into the latest trade tensions, U.S., Canada, Mexico, President Trump. It's been quite a whirlwind.
Absolutely. And today we're going to try and cut through some of the noise. We've got news reports, analysis, timelines, basically trying to understand what's really going on.
Yeah, the goal is to figure out the drivers behind these tariffs, the immediate effects, and maybe, the bigger picture for North America without getting lost in the politics, hopefully.
Exactly. We've looked at Town Hall, Politico, Heritage, Cato Institute, even a Fox News timeline. So a real mix of perspectives.
Which is good. You need that range to really get a handle on these kinds of trade issues.
So the flashpoint, this time anyway, seems to be Ontario's idea for an electricity surcharge.
Right. They were thinking about a 25% surcharge on electricity they export down to Michigan, New York, Minnesota.
And President Trump's reaction was, well, fast.
Immediate, yeah. Straight to Truth Social, announcing another 25% tariff, this one specifically on Canadian steel and aluminum. He explicitly linked it to that electricity fee. Very tit for tat.
And he didn't stop there, right? Wasn't there talk of a national emergency on electricity?
There was, which, suggests they were considering some pretty broad executive powers.
Yeah.
A big step.
But then, almost as quickly, Ontario reversed course.
After a, quote, productive conversation between Premier Doug Ford and Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. And they scheduled a meeting about the USMCA.
That trade deal, right?
Exactly. And Ontario agreed to suspend the surcharge. Ford said, let cooler heads prevail.
So a rapid de-escalation on that specific front. It shows the power of those tariff threats, maybe.
It certainly suggests they can be effective leverage for immediate concessions, yeah. And mentioning USMCA ties it into the bigger trade picture.
Okay, so let's broaden out then, because this Ontario thing, it didn't happen in a vacuum. There were already tariffs in place, weren't there?
That's key context, yes. These broader 25% tariffs on Canadian and Mexican goods, they actually started earlier, around early March 2025.
So the Ontario issue was more like throwing gasoline on an existing fire.
Kind of, yeah. And those earlier tariffs were already having effects, especially, for U.S. agriculture.
Right, because Canada retaliated. They slapped tariffs on, over $20 billion of U.S. goods?
That's the figure. And a lot of that hit agriculture, poultry, beef, fish, even yogurt.
We saw Senator Ron Johnson, Republican from Wisconsin, just say, "I'm concerned," which is pretty blunt.
Very telling, especially from a farm state senator.
Yeah.
It really highlights the anxiety, even within the president's own party, about the impact on farmers.
And it's not like this is new. The USDA calculated a $26 billion loss for agriculture from similar tariffs back in 2018-2019. Soybeans, sorghum, pork got hit hard.
Exactly. And now there's this added layer of uncertainty about potential government aid or bailouts.
Because the administration wants to cut federal spending, right?
So you have this tension. As former Trump trade official Ronald Baumgarten put it, if you're trying to shrink government, you certainly don't want to enlarge the subsidies. It's a bit of a contradiction.
Meanwhile, Trump's message to farmers on Truth Social was interesting. Get ready to start making a lot of agricultural product to be sold inside of the United States. Tariffs will go on external product on April 2nd. Have fun.
Yeah, have fun. It's a very domestically focused message, almost suggesting a complete pivot away from exports, which seems challenging, to say the least.
And it ignores how interconnected things are, doesn't it? U.S. farmers need imports, too, like Canadian potash for fertilizer.
Or steel and plastic for equipment. Jamie Tron's made that point. You cannot export a potash mine. It's in the ground in Canada. You can't just conjure it up domestically overnight.
It really shows how tangled these supply chains are. Tariffs just snarl everything up.
They do. Potential cost increases, inefficiencies. It hits the producers, too.
Okay, so to understand the thinking behind all this, we really need to talk about Robert Lighthizer.
Yes. The former U.S. trade representative, often called the architect or even the godfather of Trump's trade policy. His influence seems ongoing.
Definitely. His book, No Trade is Free, is seen as pretty essential reading on this, isn't it?
It lays out the philosophy, yes. Understanding his perspective is crucial.
And he's still advising, apparently. He told Canadian conservatives recently they should boost defense spending, help more with China.
And negotiate a new NAFTA, possibly without Mexico. He's worried about Chinese investment in Mexico, saying Canada should be on the U.S. side of that issue.
That's a very clear strategic alignment he's pushing for, U.S. and Canada versus China, essentially.
It fits his consistent focus, yeah. China is the main competitor, and strengthening the U.S.-Canada link perhaps at Mexico's expense.
Interestingly, he also thinks Trump bringing manufacturing back to the U.S. could actually help Canada.
He does. He framed it as a potential manufacturing renaissance in the U.S. that would inevitably benefit Canada through increased demand.
That seems optimistic. Maybe.
It's certainly one view. It assumes a rising tide lifts all boats, but doesn't really address potential direct competition in manufacturing between the U.S. and Canada.
And he wasn't pulling punches about Canada's defense spending either. Called it quite unfair that they don't pay, in his view, their share.
Right. So for Lighthizer, trade isn't isolated. It's tied up with defense, national security, the whole relationship.
Which leads to this idea that maybe tariffs aren't just about trade anymore for this administration.
It seems that way. More like a tool for broader America First goals. Things like border security, maybe immigration pressure.
The sources mentioned Canada committing an extra $1.3 billion for border security.
And link the resignations of Trudeau and Freeland, partly at least, to past tariff threats from Trump. Shows the diplomatic ripple effects.
Andrew Hale at the Heritage Foundation said tariffs are increasingly being used like sanctions, well beyond just trade policy.
Yeah, it suggests the potential blurring of lines, using economic levers for wider foreign policy aims.
But there's a big debate about whether this actually works or what the costs are.
Oh, absolutely. You've got supporters and critics lining up.
On one side, EJ and Tony, also from Heritage, argues the fears are overblown. He says foreign producers often end up eating the cost, that it's a fallacy consumers always pay.
That's the argument, yeah. That exchange rates or profit margins absorb the hit. But that probably depends a lot on the specific product and market, you know?
Because on the other side, you have Republicans, like we mentioned Johnson, also Senator Moran, worried sick about agriculture.
And the Cato Institute is calling the trade wars flat out harmful to farmers and taxpayers. They point to the billions in bailouts already paid out.
And that quote from the American Soybean Association president, "Farmers are frustrated. Tariffs are not something to take lightly and have fun with." Pretty raw.
You can feel the frustration there. They're the ones dealing directly with the market disruptions and the uncertainty. The need for bailouts also raises questions.
And it's not just Republicans or farmers. Democrats like Senator Gary Peters are raising alarms about inflation, how this hits American families.
Right, the potential for higher prices on imported goods is a real concern, especially with inflation already being an issue. It can ripple through the economy.
So what's next? There's a meeting coming up, right? President Trump and the new Canadian PM, Mark Carney.
Yes, scheduled for this Tuesday, May 6th at the White House. A pretty critical face-to-face.
And the agenda. The 25% tariff, obviously, but also those 51st state comments Trump made about Canada.
Apparently so. It's expected to be a challenging discussion. Carney himself said, "I am not pretending those discussions will be easy."
No kidding. Sets a pretty realistic tone, doesn't it?
It does. Suggests Canada's ready to talk, but they know it won't be simple to resolve these things.
And beyond Canada, there's still the whole situation with China. Massive tariffs there.
Huge tariffs, yeah. Up to 145% on some goods. That U.S.-China trade relationship is still, a dominant factor globally.
China says they're evaluating an offer for talks, but they're digging in their heels about negotiating under pressure.
Their Commerce Ministry was firm. Using talks for coercion and extortion won't work. So it's delicate.
And Trump says he won't drop tariffs just to get talks started. Plus, there's a deadline looming in July when that pause on reciprocal tariffs ends.
Exactly. So that adds pressure on all sides. China, Canada, Mexico, potentially, to find some kind of path forward before things might escalate again.
It's also interesting to look at how some conservatives are reacting. We saw a Reddit discussion where some Trump supporters are now expressing doubts, specifically about the Canada tariffs and rhetoric.
That's a really interesting dynamic, an internal debate, you could say. Some friction between maybe party loyalty and the economic reality hitting certain groups.
Some folks suggested they thought the tough talk was just, a negotiating bluff, not meant to be taken literally.
Right. Or you had others who were essentially one-issue voters, where maybe trade wasn't their top priority compared to other things.
And the discussion highlighted different types of conservatives, the more traditional fiscal conservatives who dislike tariffs versus others focused more on national sovereignty, maybe protectionism.
Yeah, different factions with different priorities. And for some, just identifying strongly with the party itself shapes their views across the board. It shows the complexity within any political movement.
So wrapping this up, it feels like Trump's aggressive use of tariffs is really shaking things up in North America.
but a whole spectrum of opinions on whether it's good, bad, or indifferent in the long run, and lots of diplomatic maneuvering behind the scenes.
What stands out is the sheer level of disruption to trade relationships that have been built up over decades. Lots of uncertainty.
Yeah, it really injects uncertainty into the whole North American economy.
Okay, so hopefully for you listening, this gives you a clearer map of these recent disputes, who the main players are, and the different arguments being made. It's a big economic and political story.
And it shows how trade policy isn't just numbers, right? It's diplomacy, it's security, it's domestic politics, all tangled together.
Right. So here's something to chew on. We see how interconnected the U.S., Canadian, and Mexican economies are. We see these strong reactions, pro and con, to the tariffs. What do you think the long-term consequences might be? Are we heading towards better deals for the U.S., or maybe lasting damage to regional stability and competitiveness?
That's a multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it? Definitely something to keep watching as this continues to play out.